Hi, this is Greg Remke. This is part three of an online presentation on transportation infrastructure. The original title, Key to Progress, Civilization, and Prosperity. In the first two sections, I looked at some online resources, talked about sort of the economics of incentives with transportation. Part two, I talked about some basic economic concepts applied, scarcity, opportunity cost, and so forth. But in this session, I want to look at more on the history of transportation and the role it's played in civilization. So if you were to jump back to the ancient world, here's a map that shows some of the trading routes in the ancient world of the Phoenicians and the Greek colonies in the BC period. And you can see the trade that goes from place to place. There's tin coming from some area, timber from another, iron and silver from others, grain is traveling, gold. Various goods are shipped from place to place, but you notice that the shipping is all from coastal ports. And the reason is that shipping by sea was like 100 times less expensive than shipping overland. So most of early civilization is on ports near the water in the Mediterranean and the Black Sea, or on the coasts of England, or it's on the rivers. So civilization itself is tied to transportation, trading of goods and services from place to place. Here's a map of early Christianity, and you notice the early Christian settlements, many of them are on the coast. These were, of course, around Jewish settlements, and these were trading. Communities that were involved in trade and commerce, then had a synagogue, and then the Christians went from synagogue to synagogue. But the role of trade and transportation and oceans is the reason I mentioned this. So you can find this in the rise of civilization. Islam, of course, spread the same way through the Islamic traders, as well as, of course, through conquest. That brief segue into things I don't know much about. Back to more economic geography. One of the economic history aspects where transportation ties to world geography and economic development. If you look at the map on the left, it's my left, presumably your left, map of Europe, and you can see the rivers, the rich network of rivers along the west. Africa, one of the reasons that Africans had so much difficulty developing is they had lack of trade infrastructure. That is to say, the rivers, there's far fewer navigable rivers in Africa, and also the ports. In fact, there's more coastline in Western Europe than all of Africa, even though Africa is massively larger. The coastline and the natural ports and the rivers very much promoted commerce and lowered the cost of transportation. And that means that people that are selling grain can ship their grain to a wider audience, selling olive oil, bringing wood, raw materials from the Russian rivers, the Volga. This transportation by sea and river, vastly less expensive, much more expensive to transport rivers and transport goods in Africa. Flooding was massive, of course, seasonally and along the Nile and elsewhere. So just looking at Africa and Europe, you get a sense of how important transportation is in the development of civilization. This is later in Europe, the medieval trade. The main trading groups are the Venetians, the city of Genoa, and the Hansa, the Hanseatic League in the north. So you can see by the colors, Venice's trading networks are in blue, Genoa is in orange, and then the Hanseatic League is across the Baltics, and it's coming from Novgorod to Hamburg to Lubeck and various cities there. So these are networks. So the trading networks of the cities, again, is generally by river and by ocean, again, because it's so much less expensive than trying to go overland. Now, moving to the present, the United States, what role does federal transportation infrastructure have in U.S. economic development? Well, it's huge. And again, we've talked about the key issues of incentive problems and information problems. For example, in American history, we don't know which is the best infrastructure for shipping goods and services. Is it railroads? Is it the highways? Is it zeppelins? Is it canals? But we find through history these choices are made not on the basis of what's most efficient, what's best for economic development, or what's most just, but in terms of incentives of government officials. In fact, the one of the challenges with federal infrastructure now is our Senate versus the House. The House of Representatives reflects the American population. The Senate reflects the states. So states with not many people, North Dakota, Iowa, South Dakota, Wyoming, those states have a powerful block of votes in Congress. So if the federal government were to try and focus transportation infrastructure on the places where there's the most people, the House of Representatives might favor that because the most representatives come from those areas, those cities. However, the Senate is representing a lot of empty space. So one of the challenges is we have overbuilt infrastructure, one could argue, in a lot of the less populated places, and underinvested in infrastructure where people are. So you have traffic jams in the cities in the U.S. You have empty highways in the countryside, and what's the best way to handle that would be the question. So we get a lot of special interests and lobbying and log rolling to push transportation infrastructure according to political benefits rather than to places that would relieve congestion. So there's, as I mentioned, the long-time debate over the federal role in transportation infrastructure. The founders had debates over internal improvements. To what extent did the federal government build ports or lighthouses? The Federalists, the party of Hamilton and Washington and John Adams, wanted more investment in internal improvements. They thought that the government should build more to help promote commerce. So advocacy of ports, post roads, rivers. And we have a series of episodes told, and this is best told in, I think, Bert Folsom's book, The Myth of the Robber Barons, the various efforts through American history for massive federal involvement and investment in infrastructure. So the government invested in canals early on. It seemed like something that would benefit trade and commerce. Then invested in railroads. But in each of these cases, the federal investment ended up going wrong in many ways. And so it's important to see this as a historical background. The investment in the Transcontinental Railroad that Bert Folsom describes in Myth of the Robber Barons, and I'll put some links on this, gives you a sense of what goes wrong when government and business work together on investments. The American highway system, again, this was originally a military investment as well as commercial. The idea is we needed to get our army from West Coast to East Coast, and so that's why the federal government initially felt justified in building the interstate freeway system. But of course, the freeways also very much facilitated commerce. So stepping back, looking at the river network, I showed earlier the river networks in Europe and Africa, and you can get a sense of the tremendous advantages America had in economic development with this map of the river network. In red is the Mississippi, but you can see these rivers throughout the eastern and central United States, and these of course are the backbone of trade of grain and timber and other materials that were shipped from the colonial era on to the present. This is a map of Michigan just showing the transportation network in Michigan. Of course, Michigan is inside the Great Lakes, so it's surrounded by ports and lake, inexpensive transportation services by lake, and then rivers as well. And for your state, look at a map of your state and look at the river network there. Here's one of the keystones of American economic development is the Erie Canal, because the Erie Canal is what connects New York and the coast to the Great Lakes and the rivers for internal development. So all the rich farmland that's in the middle of America, if you're growing corn but you can't ship it to where the people are, your wheat and corn isn't nearly as valuable as if you can put it on a boat. Same with mining, same with timber. The key was inexpensive shipping, and the opening of the Erie Canal was a huge step in promoting internal development in America. Now, that's a success story, but other canals weren't as successful, and we'll show some maps of that. There's a great movie that I'd recommend. You may have seen it already. It's called How the West Was Won. This was I think one of the first Cinerama movies where it was originally shown on 3 movie screens side by side. So it was a dramatic widescreen, and it's out in Blu-ray, DVD, and the widescreen, and so you can get a sense of what that was like. But in the movie, it begins. This is a boat going along the Erie Canal, so you've got horses pulling barge traffic. So the settlers were coming from Europe, from all over Western Europe. They'd come to New York, and many would head down the Erie Canal looking for farmland in Ohio and further west. So the beginning, they're on their riverboat. This is Debbie Reynolds and Carl Malden and the family coming west. And that's the easy part. However, once you get on the rivers, it gets a little complicated. So they accidentally take the wrong fork on the river and get into some rough water. They're trying to handle it. But again, the point here is canals are great for connecting rivers, but rivers need to be navigable, and rough water is tough on Western economic development. So the movie tells more. Here's a map of the canals in 19th century America. The Erie Canal is the active canal in the yellow or goldenrod color above, but the red canals are the ones that are abandoned, and the blue are the actual rivers. So even though you could say canals are great for development, still we have the question, well, which canals? Which canal will have enough traffic to pay for the investment in digging the canal and operating it? And it turns out that we had many more failures in canals than successes. It's a challenge when you look at so what example from today? Maybe high-speed rail. High-speed rail could be great as long as it takes a lot of traffic, and that traffic people are paying the cost of building it, and it's promoting commerce in cities. However, if you build it in the wrong place, you lose money, and that's what the early canals built with funding often by the states and governments were failures. That was, by the way, a little bit from How the West Was Won.
Already acclaimed and applauded the world over, in How the West Was Won, Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer and Cinerama have brought together the biggest and most distinguished all-star cast in entertainment history, characterizing the men and women who conquered the wilderness, finding a new life in this immense human saga of the American West. James Stewart is the mountain man. Henry Fonda is the plainsman. Adventurers such as these first explored the land. Then came the settlers who traveled the waterways, like the Prescott family, Carl Malden and Agnes Moorehead, and their daughters, Carol Baker and Debbie Reynolds, who left the frontier for a gayer life. There were the good and the bad, river pirates like Walter Brennan, notorious desperados like Charlie Gant, portrayed by Eli Wallach, and Lee J. Cobb as the dauntless U.S. Marshal who tracked him down. There were the...
Okay, so the point of showing that is just the role of transportation. First the canals, connecting people in the river, taking the settlers west, and then the railroads. So one of the things, what bankrupted the canals were the advent of the railroads. The railroads could take more people faster, better west than canals. So you want to be careful investing in canals when railroads might do a better job. Maybe we should be careful investing in railroads because roads might do a better job, or zeppelins. Okay, I think we'll stop here. I think we've gone far enough just for now. Thank you very much. And we'll come back for the second half of part 4, no doubt, very soon.